FilthyRobot here, just about to start the breakdown of the Baldur Gate 3 classes, and wanted to remind you all that we do not have complete information for this quite yet. A number of these classes are in the game, but only up to level 5 as part of early access, and a number of these classes are not, or subclasses rather, are not yet in the game at all. So the information I'm going to provide to you guys is a little bit of data mine stuff collected on websites, a little bit of my own D&D knowledge going into this, a little bit of previous subclasses, and a little bit of the information released on the games. What this means is some of these things are going to be a little bit inaccurate. Some things that are reported as an action might be a bonus reaction. Some of the things that happen in normal mechanics of D&D may not apply to the Baldur's Gate 3 game. They may have tweaked these engines a little bit. Where I notice these differences or where I can see them, I'm going to try to highlight them. And when I think these are going to have implications on how the character plays, I'm going to mention that. But just a caveat that not all of this information will be exactly accurate because of the sources that we're drawing from. All right, the Baldur's Gate 3 Cleric. Let's see what they have given us. So in general in D&D, clerics are full casters, almost always wisdom based since their casting stat is wisdom. Often frontlining since they start with medium armor and shields and often have availability to get heavy armor through subclasses later. Divine magic, somewhat defined by who their deity is. So you'll have base cleric spell lists, and then each cleric subclass will have a expanded spell list specific to them based on the deity they're worshiping and the subclass you've chosen. They don't have very good weapon access. Most of their damage is going to be coming from magic, although they can swing basic, I think they're simple weapons, right? So like maces and that kind of thing. And their spell progression is fairly interesting. What spells they have available to cast is not their full list of spells. So when you level up as a cleric, your full list of spells is going to be wider than the spells you actually have prepared, and you can customize those prepared spells based on long rests. So every time you long rest, you can change out exactly what spells are available to you, and this can let you customize your play a little bit for the areas or enemies or world that you're finding yourself in. I generally like clerics. They tend to be pretty sweet. A lot of flexibility, again, like a support tank class is kind of how I mostly play them, and kind of excited to see what they've given us here for the clerics. So let's look at their progression. So progression is full spellcaster progression, so 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc. These are going to be the tiers of spells you have available to you. They get Channel Divinity, which is like a sub-spec specific boost that they have a limited number of charges of that often does something very specific to the subclass, also related to their divinities. Tends to be Turn Undead as an effect here. Often this is a Channel Divinity impact, but I guess here it might actually be a effect specifically that you get in addition to that. So sometimes good versus undead, basically. And then other than that, you're going to see just because they are a cleric, and they get this full progression, there's not too much else going on. Normal 4, 8, 12 every 4 levels to get an ability score increase or feat. And then the rest of this is mostly spellcasting with a little bit of subclass impact. Very similar to the Bard in that sense, right? Like doing multiple things, but really a primary caster. All right, let's take a look at the different domains. They're offering life. Well, I guess I could read through the full list and then talk through them anyway. So they're offering light, life, trickery, knowledge, nature, tempest, and war at the start of the release of Baldur's Gate 3. The life domain apparently is going to be a heavy armor proficiency. So right off the bat, this subclass is going to have heavy armor optionally available to them. And the cleric subclass, I believe, is chosen at level 1, which makes them a fairly interesting splash, since you can pick up the benefits of their subclass for just a single point in multi-classing into cleric. Often the downside of multi-classing is it delays the progression of the stuff that you want. So your ability scores, for example, or feats are not based on the total level of the character, but based on the level of the class. So if you have Bard 3, Cleric 3 or something, you would have 0 ability scores, even though your combined level is level 6, because you would need to be Bard 4 or Cleric 4 to get these ability score improvements. And in general, there's just a lot of slowing down of the unlocking of the class features by multi-classing. But the Cleric is not a bad one to multi-class 1 point in sometimes for that. I'm thinking Baldur's Gate 3 is going to play a little bit more heavily into the restrictions based on either oaths from paladins or restrictions from god stuff. And maybe that will be interesting to play with the Cleric. Maybe it will be overly restricting. Maybe it will end up for some fun combinations. I'm not sure yet, but I'm expecting to see a bit more of that in the Baldur's Gate 3 stuff. Anyways, so life domain, heavy armor proficiency, disciple of life, which empowers your healing spells, which gives you additional healing points on healing. In general, in D&D 5e, healing is a pretty low impact per action point ability, which means that you do a lot of healing in this game, but you do a lot of healing outside of combat or interacting with the death's door mechanic, which is not exactly called that in D&D, but the difference of being unconscious versus conscious is the difference between having 0 health and 1 health. So some of the healing you do is like spot healing. When someone goes down, you heal them because then they pop back up and they have all their access to all their abilities, etc. Right? So additional healing per action isn't necessarily that good in Baldur's Gate 3, and hasn't been that good historically in 5e at all, basically. I'm not going to go through the domain lists. They're not super accessible, and I'm not convinced that we have all that information anyways. So I think I'll be mostly skipping these, but needless to say, the life domain is heavily specialized in buffing and healing, and not too different from standard kind of like healer cleric kind of fantasy play, right? I've never thought the life domain was that interesting. It's fine, but uninteresting by and large to me. I like the light domain. This one's a little bit more interesting to me. Comes in stuck in medium armor, so no heavy armor from this. You get a reaction ability to impose disadvantage on an attacker that initially starts just to yourself, and if it plays by the normal rules of light domain, I believe later on you can apply this to allies being attacked, which is a nice reaction ability for a cleric. And then some spells related to light domain stuff. I think there's some offensive spells in there, but there's spells like the light spell, et cetera, right? I found these to be fine. I have played a light domain cleric in the past and found it decent, but it again is a fairly generic cleric as clerics go, I think. Trickery domain. This one's kind of cool. I think this has been played on Critical Role, for example. I think one of the characters played this at one point. But it is a cleric capable of buffing other people's stealth checks. Stealth is a pretty powerful stat in 5e. Triggers things like lets you generate surprise rounds, lets you presumably in the storyline get to areas that you might otherwise have to fight your way through and probably do things like steal, etc. It's also a good combat mechanic for hiding and stealth checks to continue to you're hidden for generating advantage. Being able to permanently give somebody advantage on stealth checks is pretty neat. The wording on that suggests that here, but this is tough to tell exactly how that is going to be applied. Sometimes this is applied as like only one time. Sometimes this is a pretty short duration. Sometimes it is, etc. Right? Like this type of stuff. But I generally like the Trickster Domain Cleric, not as tanky with that medium armor, but still a cleric with full caster progression and all the interesting things that come out of that. All right, moving on, Knowledge Domain. This one is super cool. Whether or not it's good, I don't know. It's not a particularly combat powerhouse, but it's a really interesting lore and skill check powerhouse, I guess is the way of putting that. So Blessing of Knowledge, at the first level, you gain 2 languages of your choice. Always nice to be proficient in as many languages as you are expecting to encounter in the campaign. You also become proficient in 2 of the following skills: Arcana, History, Nature, or Religion. Arcana, History, Nature, and Religion are all int skills, which is a little awkward for the wisdom caster that is a cleric. Generally, clerics are wanting something like Constitution, Wisdom, and some degree of either dex or strength so they can wear and engage with armor and sometimes take attack rolls, for example. So it's rare that you're going to be having a lot of intellect left in your stats to budget towards cleric abilities, but this is maybe the intent here is to avoid having to make an intellect investment but still be able to answer these things, since what it does is it gives you proficiency and then also essentially gives you expertise. So it says your proficiency bonus is doubled for any ability check that uses either of these skills, which is the same effect of expertise, but looks like it probably allows you to then later on, if you can find a way to get expertise on your cleric, also take expertise to double it again, which seems pretty powerful by and large. Or maybe it's not again double, maybe it's 50% again because it's the first stat a third time, some version of that. But basically, this character should be very reliably completing roles of whatever knowledge area that you choose, which is really nice. History, religion, and nature roles tend to be highly impactful for figuring out what's going on around you, giving you additional information about enemies or areas or shrines or this type of stuff. And Arcana is super essential for anything spellcasting related, including understanding what spells are being cast at you offensively, so you can take actions like counterspell or whatever else. Their channel divinity changes a little bit with the knowledge domain. Looks like you have two interesting ones here. One of which is you can take a skill or tool for 10 minutes. You're proficient in that. I guess this means you could try a lockpicking roll. Not sure what else this is going to do in Baldur's Gate 3. It really depends on how they implement out of combat skill checks. And the types of things you can do with that. This might be great. There's a ton of different tools and you can't really cover all these tools with your party. Having a flexible tool user would be nice, but it seems like pretty small stuff to me unless they really lean heavily into that in their engine. And then Channel Divinity Read Thoughts. At 6th level, you can Channel Divinity to read a creature's thoughts. You can then use your access to the creature's mind to command it. This is new to Baldur's Gate 3. I think I have seen read thoughts before, but rarely command. If really you get a mind control off your Channel Divinity at 6, this seems pretty solid. We'll have to see how that actually plays into the game. And then finally at level 6 as well, you can add your Wisdom modifier to your Cleric cantrip damage. This is one of the ways that clerics sometimes end up casting. They might, instead of being frontline where they have to swing a weapon, which is based off dex or strength for damage, they may wish to be a backline or midline cantrip caster for their kind of like repeatable damage source. This one looks interesting to me, although I don't think it's going to be that great in combat. I think this is going to be a party skill support cleric, which is still pretty good because cleric spells are pretty strong, and having access to a number of the cleric specific ones are great, like Guardian Spirits or some of the revival or raise dead kind of spells where your character gets down but the campaign doesn't have to end because you have an ability to bring them back from either death or just off the ground, as well as some kind of spot healing and decent damage abilities. This could be a decent little support class here. All right, moving on. The Nature Domain cleric here. Acolyte of Nature. At 1st level, you earn 1 cantrip of your choice from the Druid spell list. This is surprisingly powerful. A single cantrip generally isn't that impactful, but Druid spell list gives you, how do you say this? I have no idea. I think it's Shalaya or something like this. But basically, it allows you to create a weapon that is based off your Wisdom skill to do damage. And as a Wisdom caster, this means they have a high accuracy, reasonable damage Wisdom weapon that they can use when they're frontlining or when they're midlining, which means the problem of trying to find dex or strength for a cleric to be accurate with weapons becomes not a problem because you just use your primary spellcasting attribute, which you're already leveling for your spellcasting, which is pretty cool. And then you gain some proficiencies, and these are, you gain 1 proficiency of your choice in one of these skills: Animal Handling, Nature, and Survival. Survival and Animal Handling are both Wisdom skills, which again, the cleric is going to be naturally good at because Wisdom is important to them. So getting another free skill of the area you're good in is a pretty nice pickup for your party. Nature is an int skill, which is a little bit less easy for clerics to be good at, but still okay. Oh, you do get heavy armor on the Nature domain. That's kind of nice. So you now can frontline. You have a weapon and a armor. You might still have some trouble with like free hands for casting, but there's something nice about your tanks being able to hit. Anytime your tank doesn't have a good attacking ability, it is much harder to control enemies. They're more willing, at least in previous games, more willing to run out of your zone of control because they don't take very much damage, or at the very least, maybe they're not more willing to, but the impact of them running out of your zone of control and taking opportunity attacks is lessened when you don't do anything with your opportunity attacks. So kind of nice to have that right there, I suppose. Your Channel Divinity either gets some extra effects or perhaps replacement effects. So starting at 2nd level, you can use Channel Divinity to charm animals and plants. Charm is fine, and using this as a divinity resource is kind of nice. I think it's going to be, again, entirely dependent on the story we're being told and the terrains we're in, but I'm expecting Larian to lean into the animal stuff at least. So I'm expecting this to be surprisingly useful. And then starting at 6th level, you can use your reaction to give somebody resistance to a number of different damage types, which is pretty solid. And it's 30 feet, so that's a nice defensive skill that utilizes your reaction a little bit to help the team. And at 8th level, you can do additional damage based on just you infuse your weapon with divine energy. Probably this is an action for like a duration kind of deal, but we're not sure until we actually see the stats on that, but that's okay. So this looks like a frontline build, heavy armor, and a weapon that actually swings. Allowing you to specialize heavily in Wisdom without having to be worried about some of the physical attributes, with additional skill checks of the types you care about and some situational bonuses that are all fairly decent by and large. That seems really solid to me. Yeah, just seems like a really nice little druid. I almost called it druid. Nice little cleric subclass here, while still getting all the sweet cleric things like Guardian Spirits, which is actually really good in the first front line, or spiritual weapons, or again, all the healing stuff, etc. So nice little subspec here. Kind of curious to see what else they'll add to it. All right, Tempest Domain. All right, let's see what we get from the Tempest Domain Cleric. Bonus proficiency martial weapons, so we get an extended weapon list. In general, simple weapons versus martial weapons isn't that big of an increase, with the exception of gives you more access to magical weapons that you find on the campaign. So it doesn't really matter. The dice rolls, I think, on simple are mostly D6s, and most of the martial weapons, at least one-handed martial weapons, are D8s. The other nice thing that martial weaponry gives you is access to two-handed weapons, which are often D10s, or some equivalent roughly of D10s for damage. So you get a little bit more damage from martial weapons compared to non-martial weapons, but not a lot more. And you're still reliant on dex or strength to swing these unless you figure out some other way to get a different attribute contributing to that, but most of the time it's going to be strength or dex there. Heavy armor is also kind of nice for ignoring stats, since heavy armor just requires you have enough strength basically to carry it, but it doesn't carry it. Your heavy armor is set by the heavy armor, unlike medium armor or light armor, where your armor class is set by a combination of your dexterity modifier and the armor itself. So for characters that don't want to invest in dex, the heavy armor is a really nice way to get a decent armor class. So kind of nice on the clerics here. All right, at level 1, you can thunderously rebuke attackers. When a creature within 5 foot of you that you see hits you with an attack, you can use your reaction to cause the creature to make a dex saving throw. It takes 2d8 lightning or thunder, your choice, on a failed saving throw, and half as much on a successful one. You use this equal to your wisdom modifier per long rest. It's okay. Again, having a good use of your action economy is nice, so adding some reactions is okay. 2d8 lightning will be good early and not scale particularly well later. Thunder and lightning's moderately resisted, thunder is a little less resisted, but this is only okay. You do probably want to be frontline with heavy armor. This is one of the benefits of doing that for a cleric. So you will be attacked, so having the ability to do something while being attacked is okay, but you give up your ability to opportunity attack to do this, and has a limited number of uses and isn't that great damage. It's fine, but not exceptional. Channel Divinity, Destructive Wrath. Starting at the 2nd level, you can use your Channel Divinity to wield the power of Storm with unchecked ferocity. When you roll lightning or thunder damage, you can use your Channel Divinity to deal maximum damage instead of rolling. The wording's not clear here. Am I actually utilizing a charge of my Channel Divinity to do this, which would make it really bad? Or is this just a passive rider effect? Whenever I roll lightning or thunder damage, I can just automatically, by having Channel Divinity, Destructive Wrath, deal maximum damage instead of rolling. Dealing maximum damage instead of rolling, if you can figure out how to cheaply create that effect on your character, like not burning a resource that you don't have very many of, this is a nice effect, right? It really removes the RNG of the roll. And for example, rolling 2d8 lightning damage, the range here is between 2 and 16. It's really nice to do 16 every time, as opposed to leaving that to chance. I suspect that this is going to take a resource and therefore not be that interesting. The level 6 version is kind of neat. 6th level, whenever you deal lightning damage to a large or smaller creature, so you can't do like giant creatures, for example, you can push it. Push effects are kind of cool. They play really nicely with area of effects from either your teammates or from yourself. So for example, if you have Guardian Spirits up, making everything difficult terrain, and a 15-foot radius, you knock them 10 foot away from you. Now for them to move back towards you, it's 20 movement to get to you. And much more movement to get through you to something behind you. I generally like these rider movement effects, which are pretty cool. It is specific to lightning damage, which is a little bit tricky. I'm not sure exactly how you're going to do that. Maybe you could find a lightning weapon, but you're going to be pretty lucky to do that. Maybe it's based on just your other stuff. If it's only based on your other stuff triggering, this is a lot rarer than it reads and therefore isn't as good. Seems okay. At 8th level, you gain the ability to infuse your weapon strikes with divine energy. Once on each of your turns, when you hit a creature with weapon attack, you can cause that weapon to deal an extra thunder damage. That's funny. I wonder if this is accurate, because this means your thunder strike does not play well with your divine strike, since your thunder strike triggers off lightning, and your divine strike deals thunder damage. My expectation is these are going to be interchangeable, and these are in the sense of, I bet you both of these trigger off both when the game launches, but maybe not. We'll see. Doesn't really seem that strong to me. It's going to let them melee for more damage, and perhaps with the increase of a martial weapon and a couple different ways for you to do damage in the front line, perhaps this subclass is designed to be more of a damage dealer than with melee weapons, and clerics tend to be by and large. Mostly cleric damage is coming from their spells, with basically weapons being a supporting element of this. This is maybe trying to make your weapon attacks a bit more primary focus for this cleric. This seems okay, But with the abundance of ways they're giving us, the multitude of cleric subclasses with heavy armor, this one doesn't particularly stand out to me as all that interesting. But we'll see how it works. I wish they'd show me the spell lists in a nice format here, and perhaps some of those are in the game. But again, all this is subject to change until we see all this stuff, and maybe I will do a class review once the game's launched. But for now, I'm just mostly trying to get a sense of what available options they're giving us and talk through them, so I can start thinking about the classes I want to play, and you guys can start thinking about the classes you want to play. So it would be nice to see a clean spell list of what each of these subclasses are getting. But mostly those are going to be basic cleric stuff, some of which is going to be on those expanded spell lists. They're just always prepared. So the theming kind of things for you, so you don't ever not have access to them. And some of them, the expanded spell lists, are going to be spells off of other classes. And those tend to be the really interesting ones that allow your clerics to do things that clerics can't normally do. And those require a specific spell list for the game you're playing. So here, not having access to that, I don't want to speculate too much on that. All right, let's take a look at the War Domain. War Domain, another heavy armor cleric domain, also with martial weapons. And War Priest. From the first level, your god delivers bolts of inspiration to you when you're engaged in battle. When you use the attack action, you can make one weapon attack as a bonus action. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier. Okay, another cleric that wants to be swinging weapons. And since I don't see any access to the druid cantrip, I assume then our weapons are going to be strength or dex based, and probably strength based if we're wearing heavy armor. So strength becomes a stat that suddenly is relevant to this class. Bonus action, extra attack is just fine. Equal to your wisdom modifier. It probably means 3 per long rest if you're building strength. And if you're maxing wisdom on your full caster, which makes a lot of sense, maybe you get 5 of these per long rest, but your attack modifier is not as good. This is fine. Again, it's nice to have action economy. Clerics have other ways to use bonus actions, but this isn't bad either. It probably doesn't impact the class that much at all, but you do get it at level 1, so be it. All right, starting at the second level, you can use your Channel Divinity to strike with supernatural accuracy. When you make an attack roll, you can use your Channel Divinity to gain 10 bonus to the roll. You can make this choice after you see the roll, but before the DM says whether the attack hits or misses. This is a pretty nice feature. The fact it's conditional and you already have seen the roll, you don't get to know if it hits or not, but generally if you roll a 1 or 2, you know you're not hitting. Adding another 10 to that roll, that starts to make this a much more interesting roll. I like this ability. If I'm swinging melee weapons, which I don't necessarily think I want to be doing as a cleric, especially with a strength-based melee weapon, but if I were, I would like this ability. At the 6th level, when a creature within 30 feet of you makes an attack roll, you can use your reaction to grant that creature plus 10 on the roll using your Channel Divinity. This is just this is just that effect scaled up at level 6 to apply to other characters. It might actually be better scaled up on other characters, since your other characters are more likely to be doing interesting things with their attacks because they're probably more melee focused than you are. This seems fine. And the 8th level, you gain the ability to infuse your weapons with divine energy. Once on each of your turns, when you hit a creature with a weapon attack, you can cause the attack to deal an extra d8 damage of the same type dealt by the weapon. When you reach the 14th level, the extra damage. Okay. So we've just added 1d8 damage to each of our weapon attacks. Sure. This surprisingly reads very similar to the Tempest domain to me. I wonder what the future subclass specialties are going to be. So really the only way to break this down, I mean, Tempest is doing the lightning damage stuff, and I'd love to see their individual spell lists to get some sense of how these are behaving, but I don't want to base it off of existing D&D stuff to see how they enter in the Baldur's Gate stuff. This again is another melee cleric. If I had to choose between these right now for the melee cleric, I think I'm on the nature domain, mostly because I can do it with wisdom, and then I don't have to have very high strength, very high con, and very high wisdom. I can just do very high wisdom and very decent con with some support spells for support stats for like just basically defensive rolls off of saves, etc. Other than that, the knowledge domain looks really interesting to me. I like a good skill monkey in my team, and this seems like there'll be an excellent skill monkey. And the trickery domain is kind of interesting too, which is basically changing the way the cleric plays as to how it's supporting the team. This makes it very oriented, very focused on a stealth-oriented team, which sounds kind of cool too. The other ones look all right. Life looks really boring to me. Light looks fine depending on the class spells, and Tempest and War look kind of uninteresting to me as well. But they seem to be very focused with these subclasses on melee clerics. There's only 2 that don't get heavy armor, right? 3, I guess. I guess the light domain doesn't get heavy armor, but 3 of their 6 are focused on heavy armor, which is a lot as a percentage of the clerics go. So I think we're going to see a lot of tank clerics, or at least off-tank clerics in the playthrough. And clerics have been pretty strong in that role for my experience with D&D 5e. Other than that, let's just do one more look at these. It'll be interesting to see if the undead spells, normally the undead stuff is linked to your divinity. If they did unlink these in the game, then that's kind of interesting, because now the channel divinities get better because you don't have to choose between either doing the undead stuff or using your class stuff. We'll have to see exactly how that actually plays out. But again, by and large, the subclass impacts are going to be less than you would think, because the cleric is a full caster class, and therefore a lot of the power of the class is inherent to the spell slots, which are uniform across all cleric subclasses here. So I don't know, clerics have been excellent in my time in D&D and bring a lot of really useful spells. And because of the way their magic works, you always have access to all of those spells after a long rest if you need them. And that tends to be pretty nice for playing. I expect that I'm going to be playing at least a cleric somewhere in my playthrough through Baldur's Gate 3, since I think they're very, very strong in general. So well, let me know what you guys think about the cleric subclasses. I think a couple of them are very interesting. I think a couple not so interesting, but having 6 subclasses to choose from means we'll probably find something that we want. And wisdom, it's nice to have a strong wisdom-based character to cover those skills. And I think there's a couple nice cleric builds here. So it looks fun to me. Let me know what you guys think.